You're standing in the kitchen at 11 p.m., the house finally settled into that heavy, ringing silence that only comes late at night. Maybe you're staring at a stack of dishes in the sink that you just don't have the energy to wash. Or maybe you're just waiting for the kettle to whistle, watching the steam rise in the dim light of the stove lamp. And that's when it starts. It isn't a loud, crashing realization. It's a whisper. It's that quiet, persistent voice that waits for the world to slow down so it can finally be heard. It tells you that you didn't do enough today. It doesn't care that you worked 8 hours, or handled the grocery shopping, or checked in on a friend. Instead, it pulls out a magnifying glass and aims it directly at the gaps. It reminds you of the email you didn't send, the workout you skipped, or the way your voice sounded a little too sharp when you were tired this afternoon. It replays that one awkward sentence you said in the meeting 3 hours ago, the one you're sure everyone noticed and is still thinking about, even though they've all moved on to their own lives. We are often so incredibly gentle with the people we love. If a friend stood in this same kitchen and told you they were exhausted, you would tell them to sit down. You would tell them the dishes can wait until morning. You would remind them of all the things they did right. You would speak to them with a warmth that acknowledges their humanity. Yet, when the kitchen is empty and it's just you, you speak to yourself in a tone you would never dream of using with anyone else. You use words like lazy, failure, or disappointment, as if they are facts rather than just feelings born of fatigue. We've become our own most reliable critics, keeping a running tally of every perceived stumble. We treat our minds like a courtroom where we are simultaneously the defendant and the hanging judge. We forget that we are also the ones who have to carry ourselves through the finish line. We are the engine and the driver, yet we spend the whole journey kicking the dashboard and wondering why the car is breaking down. This quiet voice in the kitchen thrives on the idea that perfection is the only acceptable baseline. It tricks you into believing that if you aren't hard on yourself, you'll somehow lose your edge or become complacent. It whispers that your self-criticism is actually ambition in disguise. But let's be honest. Has that voice ever actually made you feel inspired? Or does it just make you feel heavy? Does it make you want to grow? Or does it just make you want to hide under the covers and disappear? Think about the sheer amount of energy it takes to maintain that level of internal hostility. It is exhausting to live under the thumb of a critic who never sleeps and never gives out gold stars. You are navigating a world that is already demanding, already loud, and already full of expectations. You are healing from things people don't know about. You are navigating changes that feel like shifting tectonic plates beneath your feet. And you are trying to discover who you are outside of what you produce. Stopping the war starts here, in the quiet of the kitchen. It starts by noticing the voice and, for the first time, choosing not to believe it. It's the moment you look at those dishes, or that unfinished list, and you say, not with a shout, but with a steady breath, I am doing my best. And for today, that is enough. It's realizing that you deserve the same grace you give so freely to the rest of the world. You are not a machine designed for maximum output. You are a living, breathing person who is allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be imperfect. And you are certainly allowed to be kind to the person standing alone in the kitchen at 11 p.m. We live in a culture that treats busy as a badge of honor and perfect as the baseline. And if we aren't careful, we start to believe that our worth is something we have to earn every single morning from scratch. You might feel like you're constantly running a race where the finish line keeps moving 10 feet back every time you get close. It's that heavy, invisible backpack we put on before we even get out of bed. The weight of who we think we are supposed to be versus the reality of who we are in this moment. Think about the expectations you carry. There's the expectation to be the perfect professional, the perfect partner, the perfect friend, and the perfect stranger who never looks stressed in public. We've been told that we should be able to have it all and do it all without ever showing the seams or the frayed edges. So, we walk around holding our breath, trying to keep the surface of our lives looking like a still lake, while underneath, our legs are kicking frantically just to stay afloat. It's exhausting to live under the thumb of an internal boss who never gives you a day off. A boss who looks at a list of 10 completed tasks and only asks why the 11th one isn't done yet. We've convinced ourselves that if we aren't hard on ourselves, we'll somehow lose our edge or fall behind. We treat self-criticism like it's a fuel source, believing that the only way to move forward is to whip ourselves into motion. But that kind of fuel is toxic. It burns hot and fast. And eventually, it leaves nothing but ash behind. There is a profound, life-altering difference between discipline and self-demolition. Discipline is about building a structure that supports your life. It's the fence that keeps the garden safe. Self-demolition is tearing down the house because the wallpaper is peeling. One helps you grow. The other just leaves you sitting in the ruins of your own confidence, wondering why you feel so empty even when you're successful. Consider the moments when you feel the heaviest. It's usually when you're measuring your life against an ideal that doesn't actually exist. You expect yourself to have the same energy on a Tuesday after a sleepless night that you had on a Saturday after a vacation. You expect yourself to never feel overwhelmed, never feel lost, and never feel like you're just faking it. But these expectations are not milestones. They are millstones. They hang around your neck and make it impossible to see the beauty of what you've actually accomplished. When did we decide that average was a dirty word? When did we decide that being a human being with limits was a failure of character? We treat our bodies and our minds like they are software that needs constant upgrading, forgetting that we are organic, cyclical, and deeply fragile in the best way possible. You are allowed to have seasons of dormancy. You are allowed to be under construction without having to put up a sign apologizing for the mess. The weight of these expectations often keeps us from experiencing the very life we are working so hard to build. We are so focused on the version of ourselves that should exist, the one who is 10 pounds lighter, 20% more productive, and infinitely more composed, that we completely miss the person who is here right now, the person who is resilient, who is trying, and who is deeply deserving of a moment of peace. If you could take off that backpack for just a few minutes, what would you feel? You might feel a terrifying lightness. You might realize that the world doesn't actually stop spinning just because you stopped pushing yourself so hard. The people who truly love you don't love you for your productivity or your ability to meet every expectation. They love the parts of you that have nothing to do with doing. It is time to stop being a harsh taskmaster to a soul that is already doing its best. It is time to recognize that you cannot hate yourself into a version of yourself that you love. The weight of expectations will always be there, hovering in the background of our social media feeds and our workplace culture. But you don't have to pick it up. You can choose to carry something else instead. The simple revolutionary belief that being you, exactly as you are, with all your unfinished projects and unpolished corners, is already more than enough. You don't need to earn your place on this earth. You were born with it. Lay the weight down. You've been carrying it for far too long. There is a part of us we try to hide, the parts that feel too much or not enough, the parts we've tucked away into the dark corners of our hearts because we were told they weren't polite or productive or worthy of being seen. We spend so much of our lives curated and edited, carefully cropping out the messy bits like a photo we're afraid to post. We want the world to see the version of us that is composed, kind, and capable. But underneath that surface, there is the shadow. It's the home of our envy, our deepest insecurities, our buried anger, and the grief we never felt allowed to fully express. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." It is terrifying because we've been taught that if we look too closely at our darkness, we might be consumed by it. We treat our shadow like a monster in the basement, slamming the door and turning up the music so we don't have to hear it scratching at the floorboards. But when we reject those parts of ourselves, they don't just vanish. They don't go away just because we refuse to acknowledge them. Instead, they stay in that basement, getting louder and more restless because they are starving for attention. They leak out in ways we can't control, as sudden bursts of temper, as a heavy blanket of unexplained sadness, or as that biting inner critic that tells us we are frauds. Stopping the war with yourself starts when you realize those flaws are actually just human traits that have been waiting for a little bit of breathing room. Think about a time you felt a surge of jealousy or a moment of deep, unreasonable resentment. Your first instinct was probably to feel ashamed. You told yourself, "I shouldn't feel this way. I'm a better person than this." But what if that feeling wasn't a sign that you are bad? What if it was just a part of you trying to tell you that a need isn't being met? What if your shadow is actually just the guardian of your unlived life? When we meet our shadow, we aren't looking for things to fix. We are looking for things to integrate. It's like finding a lost child who has been hiding in the dark for years. You wouldn't walk up to that child and start listing their faults. You would sit on the floor with them. You would ask them why they're afraid. You would offer them a hand and bring them back into the light of the house. Our internal darkness only feels dark because we've kept the light turned off. When we finally open the door, we realize that our shadow often holds our greatest strengths, our boundaries, our passion, and our most authentic creativity. We spend so much energy trying to be good that we forget to be whole. Being whole means admitting that you are sometimes selfish, sometimes messy, and sometimes completely lost, and that none of those things make you unlovable. It means realizing that you can be both a person who helps others and a person who needs help. You can be both confident and trembling. When you stop fighting the shadow, you stop wasting the immense amount of energy it takes to repress it. You finally become a complete person rather than a collection of approved fragments. The transition from self-judgment to self-acceptance doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, quiet process of negotiation. It's about standing in front of the mirror and looking past the skin and the tired eyes, down into the parts of your history you'd rather forget, and saying, "I see you. You belong here too." This isn't about giving yourself permission to be unkind to others. It's about giving yourself permission to be honest with yourself. As you start to acknowledge these hidden pieces, the volume of that harsh internal voice begins to drop. The critic loses its power when it no longer has secrets to use against you. When you accept your own shadow, you no longer have to live in fear of being found out, because you've already found yourself. You realize that the terrifying act of acceptance is actually the most liberating thing you will ever do. It is the moment the basement door finally stays open, and the house of your life feels, for the first time, like it's fully occupied. You are no longer divided. You are simply, beautifully, and entirely yourself. You're sitting on your sofa, maybe after a long day, where you felt like you barely kept your head above water, and you pick up your phone. Within seconds, you are scrolling through a gallery of people who seem to have solved the puzzle of life. You see their promotion, their perfectly sunlit kitchen, their organized schedules, or the way they seem to be navigating change with an effortless grace that feels completely alien to you. And in that moment, the trap springs shut. You take a blunt object, their highlight reel, and you use it to hit yourself over and over again. You think, why isn't it that easy for me? What do they know that I don't? But here is the truth we all forget in the heat of that moment. You are comparing your internal chaos to their external polish. You are comparing your behind-the-scenes footage, the messy mornings, the self-doubt, the half-finished projects, to their carefully curated final cut. It is an unfair fight from the very beginning. You are looking at a finished building and feeling like a failure because you're still standing among the scaffolding and the dust, trying to lay the foundation. Comparison is a thief that doesn't just steal your joy. It steals your perspective. It makes you feel like you are walking through life at a snail's pace while everyone else is sprinting. But you aren't seeing the blisters on their feet. You aren't seeing the times they had to start over, or the nights they spent wondering if they were on the right path. Every time you measure your worth against someone else's progress, you are ignoring the unique terrain you've had to navigate just to be standing here today. Your journey isn't supposed to look like theirs because your starting line was different, your obstacles are different, and your destination is entirely your own. Think about how much energy we spend trying to keep up with people who aren't even running the same race as us. We feel behind in our careers, behind in our healing, or behind in our personal growth. But behind whom? Life isn't a single file line. It's a wide open field. When you are stuck in the comparison trap, you stop looking at the ground beneath your own feet and start looking at the horizon of someone else's life. You trip over your own progress because you're too busy watching theirs. We often use comparison as a way to punish ourselves for being human. We see someone's success, and we interpret it as our own failure. If they are doing well, we feel like we must be doing poorly. But there is enough room for everyone to thrive. Someone else's light doesn't make your world darker. It just shows you what is possible. The problem arises when we stop being inspired by others and start being intimidated by them. The next time you feel that familiar sting of comparison, I want you to try something different. Put the phone down or look away from the person you're measuring yourself against and take a deep breath. Acknowledge that you are looking at a finished product, while you are a living, breathing work in progress. You are allowed to be in the middle of your story. You are allowed to have chapters that are messy and slow. There is a quiet power in staying in your own lane. When you stop looking sideways, you start to notice the small victories you've been overlooking. You notice that you're a little more patient than you were last year. You notice that you're finally setting boundaries that used to terrify you. You notice that you're still here, still trying, and still growing. Those things don't always make for a perfect photo, and they might not earn 1,000 likes, but they are the real markers of a life being lived with intention. You have spent enough time being a spectator of other people's lives. It's time to come back to your own. Your life is not a competition. It is a journey that only you can take. Every stumble you've had has given you a depth that a perfect person could never understand. Every slow season has taught you how to wait. You are not less than because your path is winding. You are exactly where you need to be to learn the lessons that are meant for you. Lay down the heavy yardstick of comparison and just focus on taking the next step. Your own progress is waiting for you to notice it. We often hold on to this imaginary, better version of ourselves, a ghost that haunts our hallways and whispers, about everything we aren't. This is the right version of you. The one who wakes up at 5 a.m. without hitting snooze. The one who never gets frustrated with their family. The one who always knows exactly what to say in a crisis. And who never feels that hollow ache of insecurity. We treat our current selves like a rough draft that needs to be edited, scrubbed, and fixed before we can truly start living. We tell ourselves, once I lose the weight, then I'll go out. Once I get that promotion, then I'll be confident. Once I stop being so anxious, then I'll be happy. But the truth is, you aren't a project to be solved. You're a person to be lived. When you spend all your time chasing this polished, idealized phantom, you end up treating your real life like a waiting room. You're sitting there, tapping your foot, waiting for the real you to finally show up so the story can begin. But while you're waiting, the sun is setting, the coffee is getting cold, and the people who love you are trying to reach the person who is actually sitting in the chair, not the ghost you're trying to become. Carl Jung observed, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This is such a powerful idea, but we often misunderstand it. We think becoming is a destination in the far-off distance, a peak we have to climb. In reality, that choice doesn't happen in the future. It happens in how you treat yourself right now, in this messy, unfinished, and often confusing moment. Choosing to become doesn't mean transforming into a different person. It means choosing to be the person who is kind to themselves while they are still figuring it out. Think about the sheer cruelty of telling yourself that you aren't right yet. Imagine saying that to a child who is learning to walk. You wouldn't look at them falling and say, "You're doing it wrong. Come back when you're a marathon runner." You would celebrate the wobble. You would cherish the effort. Yet, we deny ourselves that same basic dignity. We view our struggles as evidence of a defect rather than as a natural part of being alive. We've been sold a myth that there is a version of us out there who has no problems, and we've made that myth our benchmark for success. The most healing thing you can do is to stop waiting to become that perfect version and finally start inhabiting the life you actually have. There is no correct way to be a human being. There is only the honest way. The honest way includes the days when you're tired, the days when you make mistakes, and the days when you don't feel particularly inspiring. Those days aren't failures. They are the texture of a real life. They are the moments that build your depth, your empathy, and your resilience. When you let go of the right version of you, you gain something much more valuable: the authentic version of you. The authentic you is far more interesting than the perfect you. The authentic you has scars that tell stories and quirks that make you unique. The perfect version of you is a cardboard cutout, static, unchanging, and ultimately unable to feel joy. Only the real, unfinished you can actually experience the warmth of a hug, the relief of a breakthrough, or the beauty of a quiet morning. Stop holding your life hostage until you reach an impossible standard. The version of you that exists right now is the only one who can breathe, the only one who can love, and the only one who can make a change. You don't need to be fixed because you aren't broken. You are simply in process. The myth of the right you is a cage, and the key is realizing that you are already enough, exactly as you are, right in the middle of the mess. You are not a disappointment for being human. You are a miracle for continuing to try, for continuing to grow, and for being brave enough to show up even when you don't feel ready. Think about the last time you made a mistake. Not a life-altering disaster, just one of those human slips. Maybe you forgot an appointment you had written down, missed a deadline by an hour, or accidentally deleted a file you spent all morning on. In that split second, when you realized what happened, what was the very first thing you said to yourself? Was your first thought a solution, a deep breath, or a plan? Or was it an insult? For many of us, our internal language is violent. We use words like idiot, stupid, or useless as if they are accurate labels for our soul, rather than just reactions to a moment of friction. We've conditioned ourselves to believe that if we aren't mean to ourselves, we won't learn. We treat our minds like a training ground, where the only way to ensure progress is through the threat of a lashing. We think, if I don't make myself feel terrible about this, I'll just keep doing it. But we have it backward. Shame is a terrible teacher. It is a biological shutdown. When you flood your system with shame, you aren't actually learning. You are just activating a freeze response. It shuts down the part of your brain that is creative, capable of solving problems, and able to see the big picture. It turns on the part that just wants to hide, to withdraw, and to stop trying altogether. We have developed a vocabulary of shoulds that acts like a heavy chain around our ankles. I should have known better. I should be further along by now. I should be able to handle this without getting stressed. Every should is a tiny rejection of your current reality. It is a way of saying that who you are in this moment isn't acceptable. When you live in the language of should, you are constantly mourning a version of the past that didn't happen, or chasing a version of the future that isn't here yet. It leaves no room for the person who is actually living the experience. Imagine if you spoke to a child who was learning to ride a bike the way you speak to yourself when you fail. If they fell over and scraped their knee, you wouldn't stand over them and yell about how pathetic they are for losing their balance. You would kneel down. You would check the wound. You would tell them it's okay to cry, and then, only when they were ready, you'd help them get back up. That is the language of correction. It is firm, it is honest, but it is deeply kind. Changing your internal language isn't about toxic positivity or pretending that mistakes don't matter. It's about accuracy. It's about replacing the shoulds with is. Instead of saying, I should have been more productive today, try saying, this is how much energy I had today, and this is what I was able to do with it. Instead of, I'm a failure for losing my temper, try I am feeling overwhelmed right now, and I need a moment to breathe. When you move from judgment to observation, you reclaim your power. You stop being the victim of your own insults and start being the architect of your own growth. This shift in language is a form of somatic relief. You can actually feel it in your body, the way your shoulders drop a fraction of an inch when you stop calling yourself names. You can feel the tension leave your chest when you decide that a mistake is just a piece of data, not a moral failing. You are allowed to be a work in progress. You are allowed to take the wrong turn and simply say, "Okay, I'm off track. Let's find the way back," without having to spend the next 3 miles punishing yourself for the detour. The way we talk to ourselves creates the atmosphere we have to live in. If you spend all day being a harsh taskmaster, you will eventually burn out, no matter how much you achieve. But if you start to cultivate a language of gentle correction, you create a space where it is safe to try, safe to fail, and safe to grow. You begin to realize that you don't need to be perfect to be worthy of your own respect. You just need to be honest. Tonight, when that voice starts to sharpen its tongue, try to interrupt it. Soften the words. Speak to yourself like someone you actually like. You might be surprised at how much further you can go when you aren't being dragged down by your own words. Most of us didn't start out being hard on ourselves. We weren't born with an internal critic that knew how to use our insecurities against us. If you look at a photograph of yourself as a small child, you see someone who was simply existing, someone who moved toward what they liked and away from what hurt, without wondering if they were doing it correctly. But somewhere along the way, the air changed. Somewhere in the middle of growing up, we picked up the heavy, exhausting idea that our value was something we had to build, piece by piece, tied to our output or our ability to please everyone around us. We began to grow roots in soil that was conditioned by expectations. Maybe you were praised for being the reliable one, the child who never caused trouble, the one who always had the answers. And while that felt like a compliment at the time, it slowly turned into a cage. You learned that love and safety were things you received when you were perfect, and that disapproval followed whenever you showed a crack in the armor. Now, as an adult, you feel like a failure if you ever need to ask for help, or if you can't carry the weight of everyone else's world on your shoulders. You are still trying to protect that reliable identity, even though it's crushing the person underneath it. Finding the roots of your self-harshness means looking back with a sense of compassion, not blame. It's about realizing that your inner critic is often just a younger, frightened version of you that learned to be mean to yourself as a way of staying safe. You thought that if you were the first one to point out your flaws, it wouldn't hurt as much when someone else did. You thought that if you pushed yourself to the brink of exhaustion, you'd finally be enough to deserve a place at the table. It takes a lot of courage to look at those old patterns and realize they don't serve the life you are trying to build today. Think about the invisible rules you live by. I can't rest until the house is perfect. I can't be happy unless everyone else is happy. I don't deserve kindness unless I've earned it through struggle. These aren't universal truths. They are just old stories. They are roots that have grown deep, but they are growing in a garden that no longer belongs to you. You are allowed to dig them up. You are allowed to realize that the luggage you've been carrying, the need to be perfect, the fear of being too much, the shame of having limits, was never actually yours to carry. It was handed to you by a world that didn't know how to value you for just being alive. There is a profound relief in acknowledging that your self-criticism is a learned behavior. And if it was learned, it can be unlearned. It is a slow process of untangling your worth from your achievements. You have to remind yourself, perhaps 1,000 times a day, that you don't need to earn the right to exist quietly. You don't need to be productive to be worthy of a peaceful evening. Your value isn't a variable that changes based on your performance. It is a constant, like the ground beneath your feet. As you find these roots, the grip of the inner critic begins to loosen. You start to see that your harshness was really just a misguided survival strategy. You can say to that part of yourself, "Thank you for trying to keep me safe, but I don't need to be afraid anymore. I don't need to be perfect to be okay." You are allowed to set down the heavy weights. You are allowed to breathe. You are allowed to be the person who is simply human, standing in the sun, without having to justify why you're there. The roots of your life deserve to grow in a soil of grace, and it's never too late to start planting something new. There is a profound, quiet healing found in the word enough. In a world that is constantly screaming at us to do more, be more, and have more, choosing good enough feels almost like an act of rebellion. We've been taught to fear that word. We think it means settling, or being mediocre, or giving up on our dreams. But good enough isn't about lowering your standards. It's about finally acknowledging your humanity. It is the moment you stop treating your life like a math problem that needs to be optimized and start treating it like a journey that needs to be felt. Think about the days when you wake up and you're already behind. Your energy is low, your mind is cloudy, and the list of things you need to do feels like a mountain you're expected to climb in flip-flops. On a day when you only have 20% to give, and you give that 20%, you have given 100% of what was actually available to you. That is a massive success. Yet, we usually spend the evening berating ourselves for the 80% we couldn't reach. We ignore the reality of our circumstances and punish ourselves for not being infinite. We need to stop treating our energy like an infinite well and start treating it like a precious, finite resource. When you allow yourself to be good enough, you finally leave some space in the room for joy to enter. When every corner of your life is occupied by the pursuit of perfection, there is no room for spontaneity, no room for rest, and no room for the messy, beautiful accidents that make life worth living. You are so busy scrubbing the floor that you never look out the window. Good enough is the grace you extend to yourself when the meal isn't perfect, but everyone is fed. It's the kindness you show yourself when the project has a few rough edges, but it's finished and functional. It's the peace that comes when you realize that your worth is not a score that is tallied at the end of every day. By embracing the good enough, you aren't becoming lazy. You're becoming sustainable. You are ensuring that you don't burn out before you get to see the things you've worked so hard for. Imagine the relief of walking into a room and not feeling like you have to prove your value. Imagine finishing a task and saying, "This is done, and it is sufficient," and then actually walking away to do something that feeds your soul. This is the power of the middle ground. Most of our lives are lived in the middle, in the gray areas between failure and perfection. When we reject the good enough, we reject the vast majority of our lived experience. We spend our lives waiting for the rare moments of perfection, treating everything else as a disappointment. There is a deep somatic shift that happens when you adopt this mindset. Your jaw unclenches. Your breath moves deeper into your lungs. You stop bracing for a critique that hasn't happened yet. You begin to understand that being good enough actually makes you a better friend, a better partner, and a more present human being. Because when you aren't obsessed with your own performance, you finally have the bandwidth to actually look into the eyes of the people around you and see them for who they are. You are allowed to be a person who is simply doing okay. You are allowed to have a home that is lived in, a career that is a work in progress, and a heart that is still healing. None of these things make you less than. In fact, there is something deeply magnetic and comforting about a person who has made peace with their limitations. It gives everyone else around them permission to breathe too. Tonight, let the should-have-dones fade into the background. Look at what you did manage to do. The small conversations, the moments of resilience, the simple fact that you showed up. And let that be enough. Because it is. You are. Healing isn't about cutting out the parts of yourself you don't like. It isn't a surgical process where we remove the bad traits and leave behind a pristine, polished version of who we think we should be. Real growth is actually much more like a mosaic. It's about gathering all the shattered, jagged pieces of our history and finding a way to fit them together into a whole. We spend so much time trying to amputate our anxiety, our past mistakes, or our perceived weaknesses. But those pieces are part of our story. When we try to throw them away, we only end up feeling hollow. Carl Jung noted that knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. This is the bridge between self-acceptance and true connection. When you finally stop the internal war and allow your pieces to sit at the same table, something incredible happens. Your empathy for the world expands. When you recognize that you are a person who can be both brave and terrified, or both selfish and incredibly kind, you stop judging other people for their own complexities. You realize that everyone is just a collection of pieces trying to find a configuration that makes sense. The harshness softens, not just toward yourself, but toward the stranger in the grocery store and the friend who let you down. Integrating the pieces means looking at your sensitivity and realizing it isn't a weakness. It's the very thing that allows you to feel the beauty of a sunset or the depth of a poem. It's looking at your past failures and seeing them as the scars that gave you your resilience. If you hadn't stumbled, you wouldn't know how to pick yourself back up. If you hadn't felt the sting of being misunderstood, you wouldn't be the compassionate listener you are today. These pieces aren't mistakes. They are the texture of a life fully lived. Without the shadows, the light wouldn't have any depth. Think about the energy it takes to keep your different selves separated. The work you, the public you, and the hidden you that feels all the pain. It's like trying to hold several beach balls underwater at the same time. Eventually, you're going to get tired, and they're going to pop to the surface. Integration is the act of letting them float. It's the relief of finally saying, "This is all of me, the messy, the quiet, the ambitious, and the tired." When you stop hiding the parts of yourself you find unacceptable, they lose their power to haunt you. They stop being monsters in the dark and start being just another part of the furniture in the house of your soul. This process of bringing the pieces together is where true strength comes from. A person who has integrated their darkness is far more grounded than someone who is just pretending to be positive all the time. There is a weight to authenticity, a steady, calm presence that comes from no longer being afraid of yourself. You start to see that your mistakes aren't your identity. They are just things that happened. They are the background of the painting, but they aren't the whole image. When you allow yourself to be a whole person, you finally stop being your own worst enemy, because there is no longer a side to take. There is no more internal civil war. You become an ally to yourself. You start to treat your insecurities with the same curiosity you'd give to a puzzle, rather than with the frustration you'd give to a broken machine. You begin to understand that you don't need to be repaired, because the pieces were never actually broken. They were just waiting to be acknowledged and brought home. Imagine walking through the world feeling like you are on your own side. Imagine the peace of knowing that no matter what happens, you aren't going to turn on yourself. That is the power of integration. It's the quiet, steady confidence of a person who has seen their own darkness, looked it in the eye, and said, "You belong here too." You are a masterpiece in progress, not because you are perfect, but because you are brave enough to own every single piece of your story. Tonight, when the world finally grows quiet and you're closing your eyes, try to offer yourself the same grace you'd give a tired friend. You've done enough. You've survived every hard day you've ever faced, and you've done it while being critiqued by the person in the mirror. Just take a second to realize how much strength that took, to keep going even when the voice inside you was telling you that you weren't doing it right. Imagine what you could do and how you would feel if that person started cheering for you instead. A new way forward isn't about a sudden, dramatic transformation where you never feel insecure again. It's a slow, quiet process of relearning how to breathe. It's about those tiny, revolutionary moments in the middle of a Tuesday when you catch yourself starting to spiral, and you choose, just for a second, to be kind. It's the moment you say, "I'm struggling," instead of, "I'm failing." It's the moment you decide that your worth isn't a performance. It's a million little reminders that you are allowed to be human. You might have to remind yourself 1,000 times a day at first. The old habits of self-criticism are deep, like a path worn into the woods from years of walking the same way. But every time you choose compassion over judgment, you are treading a new path. Eventually, the old one will overgrow with grass, and the new one, the one paved with grace, will become the way you naturally move through the world. You are worth the effort it takes to build that path. You are worth the time it takes to heal. Think about the space that opens up in your life when you stop being your own worst enemy. When you aren't spending all your energy defending yourself against your own thoughts, you suddenly have room for other things. You have room for curiosity. You have room for the people who love you. You have room to actually enjoy the life you've worked so hard to create. You aren't a problem to be fixed or a machine to be tuned. You are a living, breathing person who is doing much better than you think you are. The new way forward is simply the realization that you have been enough all along. You didn't need to reach a certain milestone or fix a certain flaw to deserve peace. You were born deserving of it. As you move into tomorrow, try to carry this thought with you. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of your own respect. You don't need to have all the answers to be heading in the right direction. You've spent years being your harshest critic. Just for today, try being your own strongest ally. Let the shoulds fall away and just be here in the present with all your unfinished stories and your beautiful potential.